In the silent darkness of the Texas desert, where the Rio Grande winds around jagged mountains of stone, there lies an unanswered mystery. A story of a man and a land vast enough to swallow every trace. Big Bend National Park, a place both breathtakingly beautiful and terrifyingly unforgiving, was once the second home of seasoned rangers. There, they faced scorching heat in the day, bone-chilling cold at night, canyons that seemed bottomless, and hidden dangers along the border. Among them, there was one ranger, deeply devoted, respected by his colleagues, remembered by visitors as someone always ready to help. He knew every trail, every rocky passage, every thirsty stretch of desert. For him, Big Bend was not only a workplace, but a living part of himself, a piece of his very blood and soul. And then, on one ordinary morning, he left the ranger station for a routine patrol, and from that moment on, no one ever saw him again. No radio calls, no distress signals, no clear tracks left behind in the dust. He simply vanished, as if he had never existed at all. 2 years later, in the heart of that desolate wilderness, a group of hikers stumbled upon something, a chilling clue, the ranger's service revolver, lying quietly between the rocks. But every bullet inside was gone. What truly happened out there? Why did an experienced ranger disappear without a sound? And why was his revolver found emptied, left behind, like a silent witness to something we may never understand? The man at the center of this mystery was not a wanderer, not a careless traveler, but a ranger who had dedicated his life to protecting Big Bend. He was in his early 40s, strong in body, calm in temperament, and known among his colleagues as someone you could always depend on. To the visitors he guided, he was a reassuring presence, the kind of ranger who would pause to answer questions, share stories of the land, and make sure no one was ever left behind on the trail. He had chosen this life deliberately. Years before, when many of his friends had pursued careers in cities, he turned toward the wilderness. Big Bend drew him in with its silence, its unforgiving beauty, and its promise of solitude. Over time, the desert became his teacher. He learned to read the skies before a storm, to track animals across sand and stone, and to navigate the maze of canyons that could so easily confuse an outsider. To outsiders, Big Bend might seem empty, a barren stretch of desert at the edge of Texas, but to those who knew it well, it was alive. Mountain lions moved silently in the night, rattlesnakes coiled under rocks, and vultures circled high above. Along the Rio Grande, the river itself could be both lifeline and barrier, separating two worlds, but also serving as a hidden highway for smugglers moving under the cover of darkness. For a ranger, every patrol meant stepping into that fragile balance of danger and duty. He carried not just his revolver, but also a sense of responsibility for every hiker, every camper, every lost traveler who entered the park. His job was never just about enforcing rules. It was about watching over a vast wilderness that cared nothing for human life. And yet, for all his experience, for all his caution, the land had its own secrets. A misstep on loose rock, a wrong turn in the desert heat, or an encounter with someone desperate enough to pull a trigger. These were risks every ranger understood. He accepted them, day after day, trusting his skills, trusting his instincts, never imagining that one day he himself would become the mystery. It began as an ordinary morning, one that seemed no different from dozens before. The ranger checked his gear, tightened his boots, and gave a brief nod to his colleagues at the station. There was nothing unusual in his demeanor, nothing to suggest the weight of what was to come. He signed out for his routine patrol, a route he had walked countless times, a stretch of land where he knew every bend, every shadow. Shortly after sunrise, he set off. The desert was still cool, the light of dawn spilling over the ridges and painting the rocks in muted gold. His last radio call came not long after, calm, professional, a simple confirmation that he was beginning his sweep. Those words, steady and unremarkable, would be the final time anyone heard his voice. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, burning down on the dry earth. Back at the station, no one was alarmed at first. Patrols often took longer than expected. Rangers knew the park could surprise even the most seasoned among them. Perhaps he had stopped to assist a hiker, or taken time to check a remote trail. But as afternoon turned into evening, and still there was no word, a quiet unease began to spread. By nightfall, that unease hardened into fear. He had not returned, had not radioed in, and had not been seen by anyone. His vehicle, still parked where he had left it that morning, stood waiting like a silent witness. There were no signs of struggle near it, no tracks leading away that could explain what had happened. The next morning, the search began in earnest. His colleagues retraced his patrol route, calling his name into the empty canyons, scanning the horizon for the shape of a man moving across the desert floor. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades chopping through the heavy silence, while search dogs followed faint scents that seemed to vanish into the dust. Yet the land gave nothing back. No footprints led them forward, no trail of discarded gear, no signs of distress. It was as if the desert itself had swallowed him whole. In the days that followed, the story spread quickly. A ranger experienced, careful, respected had disappeared without leaving so much as a clue. Tourists whispered about it in the campgrounds. Locals speculated about smugglers along the river, and the press framed it as a haunting puzzle in the heart of Texas. But for those who knew him, the mystery cut deeper. This was a man who did not take risks lightly, who knew the dangers of the park better than anyone, who had walked away from countless shifts in the past without incident. And now, without warning, he was gone. The desert stretched on in silence, vast and indifferent, while those who searched could not shake a single chilling thought. If an experienced ranger could vanish so completely, what hope did anyone else have? The search began as a ripple, small and cautious, but within hours it swelled into one of the most determined operations the park had ever seen. Rangers who had worked beside him for years combed the trails, calling his name into the canyons. They checked every path he was known to patrol, every overlook where hikers sometimes wandered too far. Radios crackled with constant updates, coordinates marked and remarked, but the reports all came back the same, nothing found. By the second day, reinforcements were called in. Helicopters sliced through the desert skies, sweeping low over the Rio Grande, their shadows crawling across the cliffs and riverbanks. From above, spotters scanned for any sign, a flash of color against the sand. The shape of a man collapsed in the scrub, anything that might break the monotony of rock and dust. On the ground, dogs were brought in, their handlers guiding them carefully across washes and dry creek beds. For a few moments, the animals would catch a scent, noses pressed to the earth, tails stiff. But then the trail would vanish as quickly as it had appeared, swallowed by the shifting winds. The days stretched on. Volunteers from nearby towns joined the effort, bringing water, supplies, and sheer determination. They knew the land could turn cruel in a matter of hours. Dehydration, disorientation, exhaustion, these were killers that required no weapon. Yet despite their relentless push, there were no tracks, no scraps of clothing, no broken brush to suggest where he had gone. The desert remained stubbornly silent. His fellow rangers, hardened by years in the wilderness, struggled to make sense of it. They knew accidents happened, but accidents left evidence. A slip on a rocky slope left scuff marks, a fall left broken branches, even a body succumbed to the elements would leave behind clues. Here, there was nothing. The trail didn't fade gradually, it stopped, clean and sudden, as if he had stepped off the earth itself. Speculation began to creep in. Some whispered that smugglers, moving drugs or people across the border, might have crossed his path. The Rio Grande was known for such activity, and rangers patrolling alone were vulnerable. If there had been a confrontation, it could explain the silence. But again, there was no blood, no sign of struggle, no shell casings from his revolver. Others suggested he might have wandered farther than usual, pushing into terrain even he rarely touched, but that theory felt thin. He knew the dangers better than anyone. Why would he risk it? Each night, the command post buzzed with weary voices. Maps spread across tables, search grids drawn and redrawn. Helicopter fuel was logged, Dog teams rotated, and rangers trudged back to camp with the same hollow shake of the head. Nothing. Not a trace. By the end of the first week, frustration gave way to dread. Officials considered the possibility that he had crossed paths with something far worse than dehydration or a misstep. Law enforcement widened the search, extending patrols beyond the park's borders, questioning travelers, scanning the river with boats. Yet still, the silence endured. As the second week passed, the operation began to scale back. Resources could not be stretched indefinitely. Helicopters returned to their bases, volunteers drifted back to their towns, and the desert reclaimed its quiet. A skeleton crew of rangers continued to search, refusing to accept the emptiness, but in their hearts they began to understand. The park had kept its secret. All that remained was an unanswered question, echoing in the minds of those who had known him. How could a man so experienced, so cautious, disappear without leaving behind even the faintest whisper of what had happened? 2 years passed. Seasons shifted across Big Bend, the river rising and falling with the rains, the desert blooming briefly before returning to its endless shades of brown and gray. Tourists still came and went, hiking the trails, gazing at the stars, never realizing that somewhere among the canyons and ridges, a ranger's story remained unfinished. For his colleagues, his absence never stopped weighing on them. Some still expected, irrationally, that he might one day walk back into the station, sunburned and tired, ready to explain where he had been. But reality was harsher. The park had kept its silence. Then, almost exactly 2 years after his disappearance, a group of hikers ventured deep into an area seldom traveled. It was a harsh stretch of canyon, where boulders jutted like broken teeth, and the sun seemed to burn without relief. As they scrambled down a narrow chute between the rocks, one of them spotted something out of place, a dull metallic shape wedged between stone and dust. At first glance, it seemed like an abandoned tool, something left behind by a careless camper, but as they brushed away the dirt, their breath caught. It was a revolver, heavy and unmistakable, marked with the insignia of the Park Service. The serial number confirmed what investigators would soon dread. It belonged to the missing ranger. The discovery alone was shocking, but the details made it haunting. The revolver was empty, every chamber vacant. Yet there were no shell casings scattered nearby, no bullet marks etched into the rock, no sign of what those missing rounds had been used for. Had he fired them in defense, in warning? Or had they been removed for another reason altogether? News of the find spread quickly, reigniting a mystery many had quietly tried to set aside. Investigators returned to the canyon, scouring the ground for bones, clothing, or any personal effects that might explain what had happened. But the revolver stood alone, silent and solitary, as if deliberately placed to be found. Theories began to swirl once again. Some believed it was proof he had encountered smugglers, and that a confrontation had turned deadly. Others suggested he had been attacked by wildlife and used the revolver in desperation, though the lack of casings argued against it. A darker idea lingered too, that the revolver had been planted, left as a cruel message, while the truth remained hidden far away. For his family, the discovery was no comfort. The revolver was not closure, but a reminder of how much remained unanswered. For the rangers who had once worked beside him, it was worse. A symbol that one of their own had been lost, not to an accident, but to something they still could not name. In the end, the revolver was all that returned from the desert. No body, no trail, no final explanation. Only a weapon that had once offered protection, now stripped of its power, lying cold in the dust. The discovery of the empty revolver did not close the case. If anything, it deepened the mystery. Rangers, investigators, and locals alike were left to circle around the same haunting questions. Why had his revolver been found here, so far from the patrol routes he usually took? Why were all 6 chambers empty, yet no casings, no targets, no clear signs of what those bullets had been used for? The first theory was the most unsettling, and to many, the most plausible. Along the Rio Grande, smuggling was not a secret. Drugs, weapons, and desperate people crossed under the cover of night, using the harsh terrain as both shield and escape route. Rangers had been trained to watch for such activity, but they were also warned never to confront it alone. If the missing ranger had stumbled into such an encounter, it could explain everything. Shots fired in defense, perhaps even striking his assailants. But then what? If smugglers had overpowered him, they could have taken his body, removed the casings, and hidden every trace to prevent discovery. The empty revolver might have been dropped, or even deliberately left behind as a message. Yet some question this theory: why leave the revolver behind at all, when it could just as easily have been taken? The second theory pointed toward nature itself. Big Bend was home to predators that moved silently in the night. Mountain lions prowled the ridges, rattlesnakes lay coiled in the heat, and black bears sometimes wandered down into the low country. If he had faced a sudden attack, the revolver could have been emptied in desperate defense. But again, the evidence was thin. Predators left signs: blood, tracks, disturbed earth. No such signs were ever found, and the careful absence of shell casings made this explanation less convincing. The third theory was more tragic, though no less mysterious. Perhaps he had become disoriented, lost in the brutal desert heat. Rangers knew that dehydration could strike quickly, clouding the mind, leading to erratic decisions. Some speculated he might have fired the revolver into the air, using the last of his strength to signal for help that never came. The shots could have echoed uselessly through the canyons, never reaching another human ear. And when his body finally gave out, scavengers and time could have erased nearly every trace. But even here, one detail remained strange. Why had no one heard the shots, and why had no casings ever been found? There was another possibility, one many avoided speaking aloud. Could the ranger have chosen to disappear? Life in the desert was hard, and though outwardly steady, no one truly knew the burdens he carried within. If he had fired his revolver deliberately, not in defense but as part of some private decision, it might explain why nothing else was ever found. Yet those who had known him best rejected this theory outright. He had been steady, dependable, deeply connected to his work. To them, the idea of him walking away or ending things on his own terms was unthinkable. And then, of course, came the darker speculations, the ones that never appeared in official reports but circulated among campfires and late-night conversations. Some said the revolver was staged, planted where it would be discovered, while the truth of what happened to him remained buried somewhere else. Others whispered of strange lights in the desert, or of the park itself holding secrets beyond human explanation. These stories were less about evidence and more about the silence, the vast, unbroken silence of a wilderness that refused to answer. In the end, every theory ran into the same wall: absence. No body, no witness, no definitive clue. Only an empty revolver in the dust, and the knowledge that a man who had once watched over the park was now part of its mystery. The desert had spoken with its silence, and in that silence, it left everyone to wonder which explanation, if any, might hold the truth. Today, the case of the vanished ranger remains unsolved. His revolver sits in an evidence room, a relic of unanswered questions, a reminder that even in a land mapped and measured, mysteries still endure. For those who work beside him, his absence is more than a file in a cabinet. It is an open wound. Every patrol they take, every trail they walk, they are reminded that one of their own never came back. Big Bend itself remains unchanged. The canyons still echo with the wind, the desert still blooms after rare rains, and the Rio Grande still winds its way along the border, carrying secrets with its slow, steady current. Visitors hike the trails, gaze at the endless sky, and marvel at the beauty of the wilderness. Few realize that beneath their feet lies the stage of a story never finished. Some believe the desert knows exactly what happened, that the land itself has claimed him, keeping his story hidden in the rocks and shadows. Others still cling to hope, fragile though it may be, that one day a clue will surface: bones, clothing, something that will finally speak for him when he cannot. But for now, all that remains is silence. Silence, and the haunting image of a revolver lying in the dust, emptied of its bullets, emptied of its power. A mute witness to a final chapter we may never read. And so the question lingers, unanswered, pressing into the minds of all who hear this story. What really happened to the Ranger of Big Bend? And will the truth ever emerge from the silence of the desert, or will it remain forever swallowed by the sands of time? If this story has left you with questions, you are not alone. The mystery of the Ranger at Big Bend continues to echo in the silence of the desert, and perhaps in your own thoughts right now. What do you believe happened out there? Was it smugglers, nature, or something else we may never fully understand? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We would love to hear your perspective. Your voice, your insight, may help keep his story alive. And if you found this story compelling, please take a moment to support this channel by liking the video, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell. Here we bring you tales of true mysteries, unsolved disappearances, and haunting stories that deserve to be remembered. Every share, every comment, every subscription helps us continue to uncover these forgotten cases and bring them to light. Because sometimes, the only way to keep the missing from being lost forever is to keep telling their stories.